Good evening, everyone. Dear Honorable Speaker, Professor Ganesh Devy, and our esteemed guests, please allow me to extend a warm welcome to you all for the third memorial lecture in honor of Dr. Dhanesh Jain, founder and managing director of Primus Books and Ratna Sagar Private Limited, who inspired us with his vision and left us with the lasting legacy of such important imprints as Primus Books, Ratna Sagar Books, Ratna Books, Sky Books, Avartan, and Offshoot. In the last 2 years, since we began the Dr. Dhanesh Jain Memorial Lecture, we have witnessed lectures by eminent scholars, Professor Patrick Olivelle and Professor Rupert Snell. Today evening, we have gathered here to reaffirm our commitment to his vision of publishing quality books in the fields of academic research as well as education. We are deeply honored to have amongst us one of the most prominent scholars of South Asia, Padma Shri Professor Ganesh Narayan Das Devy, who will deliver the third memorial lecture today on language hegemony and the making of India in the last 3 millennia. Can I now invite Professor Devy to take the dais, please? Come to the dais. Could sit. It's in the middle, so. So they say that a language is not just about the words or expressions exchanged or a script written, but they encompass whole cultural complexes, social realities, and ideological realms. Only a scholar with decades of work and experience behind him can illuminate us about the language complexes of the Indian subcontinent over 3 millennia. We are extremely fortunate today to be able to witness the essence of the 50 volumes of Professor Devy's life's work on the languages of India as a part of the People's Linguistic Survey of India, as well as his interventions regarding the denotified tribes and Adivasis, known as the Bhasha Project, and his numerous other researches and books. Professor Devy is Professor of Eminence and Director, Somaiya School of Civilizational Studies, Somaiya Vidya Vihar University, Mumbai. Over the years, he has been Professor of English at the University of Baroda, Professor of Humanities at the Dhirubhai Ambani Institute of Information and Communication Technology, Honorary Professor at the Center for Multidisciplinary Development Research, Dharwad, and Obaid Siddiqui Chair Professor at the National Center for Biological Sciences, TIFR, Bangalore. Among his many academic assignments, he has held fellowships at Leeds University and Yale University, and has been the THB Simmons Fellow and Jawaharlal Nehru Fellow. Professor Devy is also very dear to us, not just for his contribution to scholarship, but for his work with the Adivasi and marginalized communities over the years. I would now like to invite Professor Ganesh Devy to deliver the third Dr. Dhanesh Jain Memorial Lecture. Please welcome, sir.
The members of the Jain family, my host, Dr. Prasun, who is anchoring the Primus imprint of Ratna Sagar, ladies, gentlemen, all eminent persons in this audience. I need not say that I feel extremely honored and privileged to be invited for this lecture, the third memorial lecture for Dr. Dhanesh Jain. I say this because if one were to look for a single iconic book on Indo-Aryan languages, it is this book produced by Professor George Cardona and Dr. Dhanesh Jain. 2 decades ago, and it still retains its place of eminence and is being used all over the world. If there is one Indian scholar whose work is so sincerely and deeply valued in the field of this particular language family, it is Dr. Jain. But that is an academic achievement which makes him absolutely outstanding, but there's something more to his personality, and that is, despite being an outstanding academic, he opted for stepping into another field which transformed the school education in this country by producing the Ratna Sagar books, facing a very stiff competition from the satraps in the school publishing field, such as the Oxford University Press, and created an iconic brand for what he was doing. There are some, not many academics who think of sidestepping into another world despite being excellent scholars. There are academics who step into another world because they've not done so well in the academic world, but despite being such a luminary in the academic field, he opted for yet another field where he excelled, and he did that keeping a very low profile. He did not go around showing his trophies. I must also add that he had 2 MAs, one in English literature, another in linguistics, and then a PhD from an excellent American university where he studied under scholars like Del H. Hymes, who was a multidisciplinary scholar in linguistics, stylistics, and sociology and anthropology. And his teachers respected Dr. Jain, who became doctor, for his intellectual excellence. I feel very happy speaking in his memory this evening on a topic which he would have approved wholeheartedly. I'm going to say something about language and hegemony and three millennia of making of India. I say that he would have approved this topic because in the introduction to this book, which you must read when you find time, jointly written by Cardona and Jain, Dr. Jain, the last sentence of that introduction is extremely enigmatic, or that's how the readers would have looked at it. And that is, after discussing various controversies related to the Sanskrit language and its past being created in the 1990s and dismissing the controversies, the last sentence says, however, Sanskrit as we know it was a completely transformed language, and therefore we can stick to only the period from Ashoka, that is when writing comes in, or Panini, where grammar comes in, 4th century or 3rd century before Christ, till our time. I think that wisdom of not getting into the field where there is not enough scientific evidence, in spite of the temptation to get in that area of hazy area where there was not enough scientific evidence at that time. That wisdom is a rare wisdom. If Cardona Jain had claimed that this book contains an entry on Sanskrit from the very beginning till now, the world would have still accepted this book as a very valuable book. But there was the humility that only the wisest scholar has in dismissing what is not scientific and accepting only that which is rational. And therefore, I think he would have approved the title that I am using, Hegemony and Making Language and Making of India. The term hegemony, or as I normally pronounce it as hegemony. Shall I proceed with hegemony or hegemony? Or both? Okay. I mean, the dictionary says hegemony. I say hegemony. But we will call it hegemony because, after all, English is now a completely Indianized language. And let us make some contribution to the English language also. By the way, the census of India last time stated that only 4 lakh Indians know English. But the international data on the English language says that more than 5 crore Indians speak English. Now, one of the two is likely to be true. You decide which is true. And I believe that the lecture that I am giving now, using this enemy's language, will be accepted by all of you as a lecture in your home language. Thank you. So, thank you for inviting me. Hegemony or hegemony is a term which is a century-old term in its circulation in the way it is understood. Of course, it was used in ancient Greek, but the sense was limited to domination of various states by one of the Greek states, and particularly states near the area of Crete. In 1926, an Italian Marxist thinker was arrested. It's exactly 100 years ago. His name was Antonin Gramsci. And in the prison where he was kept till his health deteriorated and later he died very soon, he wrote lots of notes. So these are known as the prison notebooks. Quite a dozen of those, which were published in the year when Dr. Dhanesh Jain was born. And that's why that term hegemony. Gramsci talked of hegemony as a political system in which the dominator, the one who dominates, does not have to do any work, but just express a desire, and all the others do his work on his behalf without any express orders or intentions from him. So that hegemony can be fought according to Gramsci's idea of resistance by people who are what he called organic intellectuals. And I see in Dr. Jain, pardon me for saying this, going by his introduction to the book, not explicitly stated, but very much implied in the introduction, and therefore I'll urge, do please go through this rather technical introduction to the book. An organic intellectual for whom his ideas and his being are not two different things. As W.B. Yeats said in one of his poems, how can you tell a dancer from the dance? The moment the dance ends, the person is no longer a dancer. The dancer and the dance are organically linked. That's the organic intellectual, organic artist, organic thinker. It is in honor of that life of organic thinker that I would like to place before you my observation about the Sanskrit language first. Sanskrit, as you call it, we people in Maharashtra call it Sanskrit because we do not know in India till today whether the original pronunciation was Kru or Kri. It's the same with Yajna and Yagnya. Uh, but we all think that we speak Sanskrit when we, in our own pronunciation. It's all right. We all know that this language had a tremendous impact on the languages of this subcontinent. I shall very soon mention what existed prior to Sanskrit. But this impact is so much that when India became independent and the Constituent Assembly debates took place on the eve of independence, there was one member of the Constituent Assembly from Bengal who pleaded for making Sanskrit the national language of India. When he was making that speech, and you'll find this in the Constituent Assembly debates, when he was making that speech, a very powerful plea, make Sanskrit the national language of India. When he was making that speech, one of the members of the Constituent Assembly stopped him and said, tongue in cheek, why don't you make this speech in Sanskrit? Now that could not be done, and therefore we got Sanskrit listed in the 8th schedule of the Constitution, but not as the national language. Now the prestige of that language, nearly 1,000 years after the language had ceased to be language in operation, language in circulation, somebody is pleading in the Constituent Assembly of a country which won its freedom through hard struggle for making Sanskrit. It's almost like somebody in England asking for Latin to be made the national language of England. The prestige of Sanskrit, unmatched. And how did Sanskrit gain that prestige? We know that the people who spoke Sanskrit initially did not use weapons to convert people to the use of Sanskrit. We also know that not many of the scholars of Sanskrit during its heydays were kings, they were not rulers. What then made Sanskrit this language of prestige? I was curious to find out how many at the very beginning, actually how many Indians spoke Sanskrit. And therefore I looked at the population figures. Now I must also immediately mention the period which I am referring to. The Rig Vedas considered to be composed sometime around the 14th century before Christ. That's 3,500 years before our time. So the overall population of South Asia at that time, considering that, there is a scholar called Dyson who's done this historical population statistics. So considering the population of South Asia, because at that time it was not India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, therefore I'll call it South Asia if you like, or just call it this part of the world, which is the easiest way to describe where we are. So the total, considering the total population of this part of the world, the Sanskrit speakers during the times Rig Veda was being composed they were much less than 1%. A figure of about 4,000 can be attached to that. That is the highest imagination. People from 1400 till about 1100 before Christ, who gradually, sequentially advance from an area that is now described as the Eurasian steppes down south and then towards east in what is now described as Afghanistan, towards what is now being described as Punjab. So that move taking place between say 1600, that is about to 3600, 700 years to 3500 years before our time, not more than 4000 persons. How many of them would be poets? I mean, in this august audience of say 100 or so, there may be about 2 poets. I fear the number might be larger. But how many of them compose? Their names are known. The families of the rishis are listed. We know that Rigveda is organized in terms of the families of the rishis who who compose this. A few families, a few persons, they bring a new tongue to this area. Why do I say a new tongue? In my school days, I always thought that the ultimate first language in India was Sanskrit, and nothing before that existed. But as I grew up and read more on anthropology and history of environment and climate and agriculture, I now am sure that humans, and genetics of course, humans migrated, Homo sapiens. There were other human-like animals, the Neanderthal, the Homo erectus, but they migrated the Homo sapien, absolutely the stupidest among the animals, because that animal describes itself as the most intelligent, Homo sapien. No other animal has done it, but migrated to this part of the world some 65,000 years before our time. Did they have language? All of the physiology, that is the development of your physical organs here, because none of the speech organs are made for language, neither teeth nor tongue nor throat nor nose, but humans actually learned to use this and produced a system of signals, symbols, language. It is because they produced such a system that they could move out of Africa, because language became a weapon to defend themselves. Human language, because it is capable of using the past tense and the future tense. Many other animals have languages. Honeybees have them, whales have them. But to speak of a time which is absent is peculiarly human. To speak of time which is present is every animal. Ants do that. Butterflies might be doing it. But to speak of that which is absent is peculiarly human. That kind of complex language was invented, made as a weapon to advance in small batches, small groups over thousands of years, and to move to this part of the world. So language has been, complex language systems have been in existence for the last 65,000 years. Sanskrit, which emerged as, we know the Indo-Aryan, Indo-Iranian, Indo-European, then a proto-language, a mother. You all remember, let me remind, towards the end of the 18th century, William Jones put forward this hypothesis that Greek, Latin, Persian, Sanskrit, they seem to be connected, and there appears to be a common mother. So he called it an unknown language as Proto-Indo-European language. That Proto-Indo-European goes back to about 6,000 years before our time. There's a very fine book which appeared this year, 25, Laura Spiney, which gives a very lucid history of the proto, how it migrated, from where it, etc. So these people had arrived in at least for 45,000 years before our time, as genetics tells us. If you have seen Tony Joseph's book, as early Indians, 45,000 years, people have been there in South India. People have been there in foothills of Himalayas, the Shivaliks. they spoke languages. How many languages did they speak? And for that we have to go to anthropology. In anthropology there's a rule that when ancient migrations have happened, people form clutches or small groups, and the maximum size of that group can be 8 to 900 persons. If this number increases, then the group splits and moves to another destination. That's how migrations happened. As many as there were groups, there would be languages. Do I imagine that what humans spoke 45,000 years before our time remained unchanged for the next 40,000 years? I won't. Nobody should. Because language is like rivers, the currents. They keep changing depending on the ecology, depending on various other circumstances, depending on collective memories, what people have experienced, good and bad things. Languages change. They change every language is a meaningful system of circulation, currency, because it has the ability to change. If it were made steady, like portraits stuck to a wall by nails, a language will cease to mean anything at all. Every word acquires new meaning every second time it is used. So over those thousands of years, languages would have changed. And as many groups camped in all parts of India, so many, let me call them villages, before cities emerged. Those many languages would be being spoken in this part of the world. Then came Sanskrit from Eurasian steppes, primarily because horse got tamed, domesticated, and tied to wheeled cars. Call them chariots if you like, in an advanced stage. And it is these vehicles, horse-driven cars, made it possible to counter an enemy with greater ferocity, speed, and accuracy. That made migrations from these Eurasian steppes possible, and the speed increased. There are lots of books written on this topic. Sanskrit reached India. Was it the language spoken in Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Indus civilization? Often those claims are made. This book dismisses those claims. But now in 2025, February, if you look up a paper published in Nature in February 25, if the most conclusive scientific evidence is provided to say that this language came, it moved from the steppes to towards Iran, towards India, and became different branches. I will not dwell further on that topic. I'm happy that Cardona and Jain mentioned this, because it was in the 1990s that this debate erupted. Once again, after it had erupted in 1890s in France and Germany. And the 1890s France and German debate resulted in Hitler's belief that Aryans were a pure race. While Aryan was name of a language and not of a people, William Jones's claim of Indo-Aryan language was not claim about a population, but about a language. It was name of, he used it as a name of a language and not name of a people. And the very people do not use the very language for an extended period. I mean, if you revisit your own past generations, you will notice that before 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 generations, your ancestors used some other language. So language and people cannot be identified like blood group and people, or genes and people, or something like that. Sanskrit arrived here and it produced absolutely fabulous literature in the form of the Vedas. it was oral. Writing was being developed at that time outside India, but writing was not adopted in India immediately, and I will try to state the reasons for that. Some 700 years later, that is 1400 is we can endlessly debate the dates, but that debate is not important. The course of events is important. 1400 years before Christ, Sanskrit starts developing Vedic richas. 700 years later, the what we call the four Vedas are in place. By 1100 BC, the four Vedas are in place, and 7th century before Christ, we get the first major Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It is at that time. The Upanishads were abstracts or extracts or minutes of the meeting, hemoems of the Vedas. The Upanishads are based on the Vedas. They're trying to draw wisdom from the Vedas. So are the Aranyakas, so are the Brahmanas, the text Brahmanas, not the caste Brahmana. So 700 years later, it seems that the original Sanskrit of the Vedas was no longer fully understood by the people who were forming the Upanishads. Am I saying it? No. One of the finest scholars of Vedic literature has said it. His name is Sri Aurobindo. I mean, I mentioned I can mention other critics, but I mentioned Sri Aurobindo because some of my friends might be sympathetic to Sri Aurobindo more than sympathetic to some Western scholar. Sri Aurobindo said he has translated parts of Veda, and he says that when Yasaka was preparing two texts out of the Vedas, one exactly as it was recited in the oral tradition, and another where the sandhis were actually broken, the combination of words was disunited and separate words were made for remembering the original words. It appears, Aurobindo says, he has written an absolutely stunning sentence. He writes, oral tradition illuminates the text by obscuring it. Oral tradition, his claim is, had obscured the meaning, symbolic meaning of the original Vedic literature, and only the literal sense had remained. And if one tried to regain the original symbolic, then the beauty of the literal is lost. So he was arguing that either way, people had lost something of the original. That loss of the original became a gain for the tradition of Sanskrit literature in the following way. When the first school of philosophy emerged in India, the question came as to how do you prove validity of something? Like in Plato and Aristotle, what is a logically valid statement? All humans are mortal. Plato or Aristotle, one of them is immortal, therefore, etc., etc. Those examples we read in books of logic. Here, how do you prove the validity? And the answer accepted by the first school of philosophy in India was, if it is in the Veda, then it is valid. Now, did those philosophers not have enough flight of reason or imagination? No, they were very brilliant. But by then, the belief had set in that in the Vedas, though we don't understand it, means I am talking of the 5th or 6th century before Christ, 2500 years before our time, even if we don't fully understand what the Vedas are saying, because our ancestors have used that as a form of worship, as a form of magic, as a form of keeping us together, as a form of remembrance, then there must be a great divine strength in them. Despite knowing the families of the rishis, the Vedas got to be counted as apaurushaya. While you know the names of the authors, still these were shown, I'm not saying these were seen, these were shown as texts without any known human author, apaurushaya. The prestige of a text which is not, I mean, you imagine if today suddenly somebody in India says, I am not biological, but I am, the prestige of the person will go up. Because all humans are born out of mothers and fathers. So here is apaurushaya text, and therefore inviolable. It cannot be questioned. Whatever it says, even though we don't understand what it says, is true. And that became the cornerstone of schools of logic in this country. A text which gains prestige, but can also be used as a beating stick, as it happened with Shakespeare in England. When 19th century kids in England, working class children, were forced as punishment to study Shakespeare when they said they cannot study Latin. In 1842, an English act says that if you can't study Latin, study Shakespeare, and they did not understand Shakespeare. So those who understood Shakespeare could become ICS. Those who could understand or claim to understand the Vedas, or at least some part of the Vedas, gained a higher social status. Those who could recite them belonged to the top class. Those who helped in the recitation became the next class, like providing sufficient security for recitation, for the ritual of sacrifice, yajnas. Those who were in the supply line of these people, they became the third class. And those who are neither suppliers nor security providers nor the seers of the Vedas, they were left out as the faltu, Shudra. Sanskrit language, not as language, but because of this obscurity emerging around the Vedas, particularly the Rig Veda, became a means of determining a social hierarchy, the Varna system. Those who did not belong to an upper layer in the Varna constantly craved to go there. I remember some 60 years back, an Indian sociologist, his name was M.N. Srinivas, some of us know. He was trying to describe entire India, and he said, if there is one characteristic that defines all of us, it is our desire for Sanskritization. That means going upward in social hierarchy. And even today, you know how many of the castes which are not Brahminical would want to become Brahminical. They feel happy. Hegemony requires an idea which is accepted by people who actually do not have power, but people who want to strengthen the power of that idea. And Sanskrit, which is an absolutely beautiful language, I love it. The poetry of Sanskrit, the text in the grammars of Sanskrit, the drama in Sanskrit, I just love it. There are so many moments in my life, very special moments, when I can express myself in no other language but Sanskrit. For instance, some sacred moments, some very special moments. And when I am helpless, left without words, I often run to Sanskrit language to drag one or the other root, add something, and make a new word for expressing myself. All Indian languages have done that, including Tamil, Telugu, and Kannada, and Malayalam. It is not the question of language, but it is the question of the beginning of that language, which created an instrument because of its obscurity to redefine Indian society. I said people had come here earlier, and 7,000 years before our time, agriculture touched India. And in the villages, people were, all agrarian words related to agriculture, implements, varieties of plants. They neither Sanskrit nor Persian nor English. They did not draw upon Sanskrit for the agriculture. But the Sanskrit language became a shining example of reputation and esteem. Hegemony was accepted. Let me add very briefly. At that time, were there only local dialects? The answer is no. I mean, if you look at this book, you will find that in areas where thinkers like Gautam Buddha operated, geographical areas, there were mighty languages which could anchor deep philosophies. None of us will refute here that Buddhist philosophy is as deep as Vedic philosophy. And in order to create that philosophy, you need a rich language. In just a village dialect, you cannot create great philosophy overnight. There were other languages. Did they acquire the same kind of reputation? No. For Buddha and for Mahavir Jain, though their literature was written first, as far as writing is concerned, it is the Jain text which came into writing first, and then came Sanskrit text into writing. They were remembered orally. This is, I am going to 3rd century. Andrew Ollett has done excellent work as to which language went into writing first. It's worth listening to him. Maybe next year you invite him for this lecture. Buddhists and Jain thought had legitimacy as thought, but did not have any association of great magical charm. Hegemony of Sanskrit cannot be compared with what happened to Buddhism and Pali and Jainism and Pali and so on. Pali remained Pali, Sanskrit became Sanskrit. Sanskrit was very special, and therefore your word which you use every day in life called Sanskriti, to Sanskritize yourself, became the foundation of what we call Indian civilization. In fact, the term civilization has only this parallel of Sanskriti. I'm looking at the watch. I wanted to speak about Persian. Persian was the next hegemony in India. It first hit India sometime in the 12th century, actually 9th century, but in the 12th century in full swing, and it continued well until the 19th century. Some of you might already know, that the first book towards modernizing Indian society, written by Rajaram Mohan Rai, which was his first book, was written in the Persian language. He was saying that let's think of all gods as equal gods. He wrote it in Persian. A great advocate of the English language writes a book in Persian. So all the way from 12th century to the end of the 18th century, Persian dominated. So many millions, not millions, tens of thousands of words of Persian we imbibed. In my mother tongue Marathi, we don't have word for paper. We use kagaz. I don't know which word you use in Hindi for paper. We don't have word for ink. We use in Marathi shahi. We don't have word in Marathi for book. We use pustak or kitab. These are all Persian words. I mean, I can go on. Rose. Rose means not a rose is a rose, but every day. Persian. Hundreds, tens of thousands of words of Persian we imbibed. But Persian brought with it an idea of love. which captured the imagination of India. It came through Sufism. It did not bring the idea of mysterious God. It brought in the idea of mysterious love, which can cure anything: social evil, mental, psychological, spiritual. Love became the heart of that hegemony, and people accepted that. The Marathi people are extremely sorry. I am overrunning the time, but let me complete this point. Shivaji, who is claimed by many people as Hindu king, he was Hindu, of course. He wrote his letters to Aurangzeb using Persian language, and he did not feel uneasy doing that. Persian gave Indian society a new opening, bringing in a tremendous efflorescence of bhakti movement, and a kind of beginning of a modern Indian sensibility. Indian modernity goes back to bhakti period, and the last of the bhaktas, not the, of course there are some contemporary bhaktas, but last of the real bhaktas were Rabindranath Tagore, who translated Kabir, and Mahatma Gandhi, who brought Narsi Mehta, Vaishnav Janto Tene Kahi, and Aurobindo Ghosh, whose name I mentioned. And these were the last of the bhaktas. Persian created a counter spirituality, a different order of society, and it helped Indian saints in particular. It did not force, it actually it did not induce, it inspired Indian saints to fight the Varna system. This was the second hegemony, a different kind of hegemony. The third and the last, English. When the British landed in India at Surat, Sir Thomas Roe came. Not a single Gujarati understood any English word. Not an Englishman, single Englishman understood Gujarati. They had to employ a set of translators. They had from Gujarati to Persian translation, from Persian to Armeniac, from Armeniac to Portuguese, and Portuguese to English. And for writing the, Sir Thomas Roe applied for license for trading in 1601. He got his final reply from Jahangir in 1617. 16 years of translation time for getting a simple license. I mean, today our life is much better. We can get a license in 3-4 years time here. So, the ease of doing business. But English. So not a single Indian new English. And how many English people did ever live in India? There is a specific figure, absolutely accurate figure. At the height of the English presence in India, we had something like 1,42,000 Englishmen, and this was during the Second World War. That was unusual, but not more than 50,000 English people in India came here, and look at what Indians have done to the English language. We danced and jumped for getting it. It was like, balloons flying, stars in the sky, and we were plucking the stars, and anybody who got English thought they had got status. So with Sanskrit, if we call Sanskritization, the parallel term with English is modernization. Yes, if a daughter-in-law did not speak English, she was pichdi hui, and if she spoke English, even some smattering, both advanced. Third hegemony in this country was, were there no other languages when the English came? No, actually Tamil, Marathi, Bangla, Hindi, they were all flourishing. But the same prestige never got attached to Tamil or to Hindi. Three different hegemonies. I will now say my concluding sentence. It is 2 minutes to 7. Sanskrit acquired its hegemony through oral traditions, power of the sound. Persian came here and it acquired hegemony not through sword. Please don't make that mistake. It's a completely wrong idea. Paper had entered our life. In the 12th century, paper. Delhi became rich in the 12th century because there were paper merchants in Delhi. They were traders. Paper and writing made Persian a language accepted by everybody. When English came, there came printing, a different mode of language production. Will the fourth hegemony of language be that of Hindi? My answer is no. Not unless Indians learn to write English language with Devanagari script. That would be a great idea. They write in Hindi script. No, it's a very good solution. In Kerala, they are doing it. They write English in Malayalam, and therefore they speak better English, it seems. Then, but only they understand it. The next hegemony is of a language which has no sound. It has only visual presence. It is not a language which is carried by air as the medium. It's a language which is carried by digits through electromagnetic waves for interplanetary communication. That language has already started its hegemony all over the world. And when that spreads completely, we shall neither be able to speak or understand Sanskrit, nor be able to speak and understand Persian, nor be able to speak and understand English. We will be, as a Bangla poet said, awak prithvi awak. We will be speechless, so-called humans. The name for that animal is Homo Deus or cyborg. If you like that idea, you will call them Homo Deus, almost like God. If you don't like that idea, you will call them semi-machine, semi-human cyborgs. We have already arrived there. And in order to rescue human speech and human language from the newly spreading hegemony, we need to understand the nature of hegemony of language in the past in a dispassionate manner, in a very detailed manner. Then alone, we might be able to defend at least some of our languages and at least some of the wisdom that we inherited over the last 70,000 years, which has come to us through tremendous labor that millions or billions of human brains have contributed to making this present system of symbols a useful and a meaningful currency. We are at the threshold and we need to think deeply about our language situation without allowing false sense of pride about our past or a completely despondent view of the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Devy, for a fascinating journey across centuries and millennia. And to be able to, along with you, to get into the swaths of time and to deep dive into certain moments, it was really an experience. So now let us open the floor for questions for the next 10-12 minutes. My colleagues will hand over the mics. Let's start with the questions. Can we have the mic, please?
Namaste, I'm Kavita Sharma. Your fourth hegemony. Well, yeah, a little bit maybe in the realm of fancy, because after all, when you do all the digital whatever, it'll have to have, how does the content go? It can't be just one, like a Morse code. It'll have to have some content, right? So that will mean some language. whether you're sending messages in email or whatever you're doing, even interplanetary, it has to be some language. So would you want to elaborate on that?
Thank you, Kavita. It's such a pleasure to get to hear the voice of a friend. Thank you. Recent research on learning patterns of children and what is happening to the human brain goes to show that the Broca's lobe, that part of the brain which helps us to analyze the world through sound, has started developing great fatigue in the process of evolution. I mean, it's not in my hands or your hands or India's problem or China's problem. Is what is happening to the species. And the prefrontal cortex is more active. That is, humans will prefer increasingly, if not overnight, but quite rapidly, signals coming through visual forms rather than oral forms. Now, the languages as we are known are all sound-based oral analysis system. The visual forms, I mean, we already know. I learned with some difficulty that you are not supposed to say thank you, but you're supposed to, I think, show something like. I mean, for quite some time I did not know why, because in my time as a child, showing this means illa, no, yes. Hindi mein angutha dikhana. There was a proverb actually, but the meaning has changed. The visuals are replacing sound signals very rapidly, and these visuals do not have linguistic boundaries as languages we knew had, because they are universal in nature. Of course, there will be local dialects. How the Spanish people say I thank you or I like it, and how the French say it. I'm sure the French will develop a more stylish way of showing the thumb with some slant, but whether it's China or Pakistan or India, this will work. So this will happen slowly, but it appears there is one problem with this species, the Homo sapiens. I mean, this is of course well-known Darwinian theory that when there is diversity, then alone evolution is possible. But humans have eliminated all other human-like creatures in the past. I mean, we are among the newest of the species on this earth, not the newest, but among the newest species, and we eliminated other human forms. Therefore, we have already bound ourselves by complete absence of diversity. We have diversity among ourselves, like some are dark in color, some are lighter in color, some are yellow, some are red, but that is no diversity. The humans, Homo sapiens, all are a species that has created a condition for itself which makes it foredoomed to be extinct in future, and it is rapidly moving in that direction ecologically, environmentally, sociologically, and so for depending on the spectrum you take up, yes, languages will remain operational. Now, I hope they do. I want my grandson and granddaughter to read at least 1 or 2 pages of like you are reading your father's literature. I want my children and to read whatever terrible things I write. But whether across 10 generations, many of you who have written books, you know that other people's children read them. So we are rapidly moving in the direction of mass extinction. And with us, we are dragging the rest of species. Unless a new form of government comes up, which allows representation of all species in the parliament, not only humans. Yeah, some Australian philosophers have started developing it in the name of cosmocracy, not demos, but cosmos. That is, we take responsibility for the entire cosmos, not this political, like John Locke wrote about democracy after the quarrel between the Catholics and the Protestants and rise of reason in Europe. Because of the climate emergency and ecological disasters, this new political philosophy is coming up. One day, if it comes into existence and systems change drastically, fundamentally, then perhaps the humans will have this species will have longer life. Of course, for me, I am already 75 and how do I care for what happens in the future? But I sometimes feel that I should. So that language will be there in a limited sense, but in the longer evolutionary trajectory, the chances are dim. I mean, the chances are like an Indian getting Nobel in science. Sorry.
Can we then say that we are currently at the threshold of a interplay of various hegemonies and the consequent attempt to give a citadel of a position which may ultimately lead to a new system of castes, as we saw initially, as you said? Are we there at the threshold of that?
I fully agree with you. We have to invent a new idea of order, which is not based on domination but based on humility.
Absolutely.
Where all of us learned the greater the humility one has, the better the social esteem of, if that kind of atmosphere emerges, that our saints had started creating in India. But that path was curtailed. But evolutions always run into, evolution never runs in straight lines. It's always disjointed dots. But eventually the dots will get joined.
Thanks for opening this vista of thought in the process. Wonderful. It was a great pleasure on this flight of hegemony and intercosmic interplay of words and how they saw things. Wonderful.
A century.
Hats off.
Thank you. A century after Antonin Gramsci, we have to think of what is counter-hegemony. He spoke of resistance from the Marxist sense, altered Marxist sense. We'll have to think of what could replace hegemony, because hegemony is an old habit of humans, and that habit we will have to break only through new ideas, even if they sound very crazy, as I am sounding crazy tonight. Thank you.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, thank you, Professor
I am
Devy.
not sure if I'll be able to answer.
No. I was thinking of, the binary that often, the simplistic binary that often gets constructed between Buddhist Pali and, Brahminical Sanskrit. But as you well know, and, as Professor Bahulkar, our mutual friend, would remind us, there is a very rich tradition of Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit.
Yeah, and great intersectionality.
So how do you see that? How do you see Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, in which so much literature is produced in the latter years of the first, decade of the first millennium, the Nalanda tradition, as it's often called, because in content it's not, that Vedic, right? It's anti-Vedic, and yet it is using a peculiar version of Sanskrit. So where would you locate it in this?
Yeah. Actually, thank you for that question. I was being a little unfair to that tradition, but my focus was on 1400 to about 5th century, till grammar creates Panini creates a system of many languages called Vyakaran. But Sanskrit indeed has had Sanskrit after Panini has a tremendous give and take relationship with most other languages. So many Prakruts, for instance, so many Apabhramshas, Not just that, but when someone like Matanga went around the country to find out how many musical systems there are, and he found innumerable, drawing upon the language resource of the area. He produced the text in Sanskrit. In Sanskrit, later, say, is it 5th or 6th century, the Riti Siddhant is a diversity of Sanskrit styles. All of this happened, but the fundamental bias of those who wanted to speak Sanskrit or those who spoke Sanskrit, that the Vedas are ultimate, did not change radically any time, and if it did, as it started loosening, somebody else came up and then reimposed that. I mean, this is the great Adi Shankaracharya, for instance, the Vedanta. Aurobindo makes a very good observation. He says the Vedas and the Vedantas, the two need to be seen differently. And the loss of spontaneity is one thing, but intersectionality with all other languages developed. Tamil took words from Sanskrit, Sanskrit took words from Tamil, many. I mean, Sanskrit has borrowed from many other languages, and many other languages have borrowed from Sanskrit. So that is that in the period that what we now recognize as Sanskrit happened all along. But at the time, at the juncture when Buddhism was coming in, when it was not Buddhism but the Buddha, and the Upanishads were getting set, the dialectic must be very fascinating. But the records of that dialectic are not enough for us to write something at length about it or think at length. Ambedkar tried to do that in some of his last books. But beyond that, I draw a blank. When Cardona and Jain had to sit down and think of what Sanskrit will they write about, they decided that let there be some chaos on the other side of the wall, but here there's an orderly tradition of Sanskrit that we accept. So, and linguists, not him, not your father, but other linguists have accepted this slightly convenient mode of early Indo-Aryan, Middle Indo-Aryan, and modern Indo-Aryan or Sanskrit. Something. We need to dig deeper in that to understand how we respond to hegemonies, why we accepted the British, what in it made us accept them and not hate them. I mean, that's the extraordinary thing about India. Yeah, we opposed them but did not hate them.
It's a fascinating journey from Sanskrit to Persian to English. Now, if you look at the fourth as you predicted, if you look at just basic facts, 2017 December we launched Always On 4G, and in the last 8 years you have 800 plus million Indians spending almost 3 hours every day in a visual medium on the device. So your prediction of a fourth language, that's one perspective, which is an evolution from English. But if you look at Germany and Japan, when they look at evolution, because it's all intelligence, you know, as you said, who captures this hegemony? If you see where money is, then all of this is still in the Manomaya Kosh. The next is the Vidyanmay, and Sanskrit gives a direct connect for people who engage with that language, with the sound, to the next level, right? So the question to you is that you are looking at one aspect. If you could give us a perspective of the Sanskrit evolution towards a greater intelligence, which is a Manomay or an Anandmay, which is the evolution, because Germany is doing that, Japan is doing that, and these concepts are from the Vedas from our country. So what's your thought?
Thank you. I'm glad you raised this question. Let me cite two examples. One is Bhartrhari's interpretation of time. We are often told that Indian sense of time is cyclical and the Western sense is linear. I mean, even the most superficial reading of Bhartrhari's Vakpadiya actually tells us that Bhartrhari says that idea of time, that impression is simplistic. Bhartrhari says time is like a road. We are the wayfarers. We go from here to somewhere. The road has remained where it is. Time does not move, only we move. He says this is not the only idea. It is like a this water wheel on a well. कुएं में से पानी निकालने के लिए वो एक एक मटका खींचते हम डोरी से. The time is like the water in the well. You draw that matka to yourself, the wheel turns and the water goes back to the well. Does time exist for you, or is your illusion? The third thing he says about time is, I don't know, some of you might have seen, there used to be people who trained pigeons, kabutar, Lal Darwaje ke, what is that, Lal Kile ke samne. So, in medieval times, ancient times also, there were kabutar trainers, pigeon trainers. And Bhartrhari says that time is like, moments in time are like the pigeons that fly. But don't forget that there's a thread tied to their toes को क्या बोलते होगे कबूतर के पता नहीं मुझे, whatever अंगुलियों को, and suddenly somebody might snatch you, pull you back. Now these different ideas of time. Then there is simultaneously another tradition, Kunda Kundacharya, your tradition, who says that time is like atoms, Kalanu. Now this diversity of thinking about time in ancient literature, both Buddhist and grammarian literature, allows us to think of the time between two planets. Supposing I travel out of Earth, I mean I catch that escape velocity, I attain escape velocity, jump out of the Earth atmosphere, and I am somewhere between Jupiter and Earth. What will be my sense of time? Because time will become unreal there. That is, but I will not say that Bhartrhari predicted Einstein. That is, Bhartrhari had Bhartrhari's sphere of activity. To yoke together two different minds from centuries across is a very attractive thing, but sometimes it can cause injustice to both by some kind of hidden distortion. So this is about, I mean, one example about time I wanted to give you. I said this second example is similarly about space, but space in the sphere of linguistics, and that is Anandvardhana's Dhvanyalok. Dhvanyalok is not about the loka of dhvani. It's not about the sphere of dhvani. It is about the space of dhvani. So he says, meaning has many layers. Meaning can be at an innate stage. It can be explicit. It can be prior to articulation. So Vaikhari or Para, Pashyanti, etc., etc. Now Pashyanti is what kind of? Pashyanti is the seen, S-E-E-N, seen meaning, like yeah. Pashyanti is very peculiarly associated with Jnana Chakshu. Jnana Chakshu. In the Gita, there is a verse, Vimudhananu Pashyanti Pashyanti Jnana Chakshusha. The fools, not fools, the confused ones will never be able to understand, but only those who see with Gnana Chakshu, not the real Chakshu, not the real eye, but the whatever that, I don't know what it is, Gnana Chakshu. So the meaning is seen, not heard in Anandvardhan. It is the ultimate meaning of a word is to be seen and not to be heard. One can easily say that this is straight in the courtyard of Google, or that is visual signals. What is that man who was liked by Trump one time and disliked by him another time? Yeah, but I cannot say that Anandvardhan is talking Elon Musk's language, because they belong to different contexts. They rooted. हमारा चंपा है ना, चंपा flower. I cannot say daffodils and champaks. Daffodils are daffodils. ये भी yellow है, वो भी yellow है. ठीक. Allow both of them to be yellow. Reminiscent of that, yes, maybe, but that is not a straight line of development of thought. It's so as a coincidence, as accidentally, that line of thought is there. I admire Anandvardhan immensely, but I admire Wittgenstein immensely for different reasons. But I shall not say that Anandvardhan was the Pitamaha of Wittgenstein. That's unfair to Anandvardhan, because I don't know if Anandvardhan wanted Wittgenstein to be a child. Let us give him a choice. Thank you.
Yeah. So I had a small question.
I hope I answered your question to some extent. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we know that there is this critique of Gandhi, that Gandhi was conservative about the Varna question. So would you say that he did not pay much attention to that origin question that you mentioned, from where the hegemony of Sanskrit derives from vis-a-vis Vedas, and how Sanskrit was, understood? And so do you think that by, sticking to the concept of Varna, that Gandhi was kind of either, kind of resisting or not really open to questioning that sort of history of that origin of hegemony when it comes to...
Thank you.
Thank you.
You mean which Gandhi? Mahatma Gandhi. I mentioned Raja Rammohn Rai writing in Persian, saying Allah, God, Ishwar, they all similar. That was the seed idea of Brahmo Samaj. The Arya Samaj decided to move away from that idea and made Veda or Vedanta as the others as peripheral. Gandhi brought back this bhajan, Raghupati Raghava Rajaram Pat Ishwara Allah Tirunam. Or he spoke of Patita Pavana. He spoke of to understand the pida of others is the essence of pida parai janere. Vaishnava janato ten. So he was not defending Vaishnava, he was defending knowing the pida of others. And if we go to the Karachi resolution of 1931, which is, this is very interesting for each one of us. This is exactly a year after the Dandi March. He sits down in his own handwriting, he writes a resolution, which then the Congress passes that year, which subsequently became the foundation of our fundamental rights in the Constitution, where all are equal. Recently, I heard Harshmandar interviewing Rajmohan Gandhi on Gandhi stand in the light of the question that you raised. And Rajmohan Gandhi said, Rajmohan Gandhi is a truthful scholar. I mean, it's very rare in scholarship, field of scholarship. He's a very, he doesn't drag facts to his view. So he said, no, Gandhi wanted India for all as equal people. Now that is the extent of Gandhi's fight against Varna. Ambedkar was more explicit. Ambedkar's focus was caste, and therefore he had to hit at Varna. Gandhi was against hierarchies of all kinds. I mean, unless this man had a deep faith that hierarchy is an evil, he would not have gone to see Queen Elizabeth half naked. He would have respected, अभी देखिए किसी को पद्मश्री या पद्म भूषण देते हैं और राष्ट्रपति के पास से सम्मान तो कोट पहन के जाते हैं ना, for the form's sake. This man was so radical that he did not follow even that form in the times when the Queen was really most powerful. It's another thing that debate between Ambedkar and Gandhi happened in the light of the elections and constituency reservations, and it deepened, the divide deepened. It is possible that we looking at Gandhi sometimes through the prism of Ambedkar's love for the oppressed, defense of the oppressed. I respect Ambedkar tremendously. I mean, after Buddha, Ambedkar is one great man. After Kabir, Gandhi is one great man. Kabir was a weaver, Gandhi was spinning. They both made the texture of this country. Buddha asked questions and Ambedkar asked questions. They made the questioning the conscience of this country. We need Buddha and Gandhi, Ambedkar and Kabir. All four make the square within which my India is situated. Thank you.
सर, एक जिज्ञासा है मेरी सर. सबसे पहले तो मैं प्रणाम कर रहा हूँ कि हम पाली प्राकृत के जो विद्यार्थी हैं उनके लिए आपने बहुत सी प्रेरणा दी है. लेकिन जैसे जब आप कहते हैं कि संस्कृत 1% लोग जानते थे, तो उस समय 99% जानने वाले लोग प्राकृत के थे. और अगर हम 99% आप स्वयं स्वीकार करते हैं कि उस समय 1% लोग संस्कृत जानते थे, तो 99% लोग प्राकृत को जानने वाले थे, और उसका कंट्रीब्यूशन हम लोग किस तरह से भूल सकते हैं. आप देखिए कि संस्कृत में जो पोएट्री है उसमें 45% प्राकृत के एग्जाम्पल दिए जाते हैं. संस्कृत की जितनी भी काव्य के, जिसको हम लोग कहते हैं शास्त्र, अलंकार, रस, छंद, उसमें जो भी एग्जाम्पल, सटीक एग्जाम्पल दिए जाते हैं वो प्राकृत के दिए जाते हैं. प्राकृत का जो विकास है वो अपभ्रंश के रूप में है. अपभ्रंश के बाद में हिंदी हम देखते हैं, और संत साहित्य की जो परंपरा है जो हमारे पूरे जनमानस में व्याप्त है, उसका प्रभाव हम आपके हैगमैनी शब्द पर तो आपका व्याख्यान सही है, लेकिन कंट्रीब्यूशन की दृष्टि से जब हम देखते हैं तो इन परंपराओं को जरूर इसमें शामिल करना चाहिए. ऐसा मेरा सामान्य.
क्या ये आखिरी सवाल हो सकता है कि क्या, और यू हैव समथिंग मोर? देन आई थोड़ा मैं टेस्टफुली आंसर देता हूँ. चाहता हूँ 1% और 99% ये सीधा गणित है. वो थोड़ा 33% आप तमिल, प्रोटो तमिल के लिए छोड़ दीजिए। और सुनीति कुमार चटर्जी बहुत बड़े विद्वान थे, लेकिन महेश्वर नियोग थोड़े गॉट साइड ट्रैक्ड बिकॉज ऑफ सुनीति कुमार। और आसामिया के पहले की क्या भाषा है उसके बारे में हमारे देश ने चुप्पी स्वीकार ली। द इंडो आर्यंस हैड नॉट रीच इनिशियली, वो यमुना ने दिल्ली, पंजाब गंगा, आसाम तक देर वे अदर लैंग्वेजेस, उसके बारे में तो उसके लिए 33% आप छोड़ दीजिए, बाकी का इलाका प्राकृत का, यानी 32% मैं स्वीकारता हूँ। और आपकी बात सही है, मोस्ट ऑफ द नैरेटिव लिटरेचर इन संस्कृत इज ऑफ प्राकृत ओरिजिन। एक तो महाभारत के आरंभ में या आदि पर्व में लिखा है, ये गाने वाला कोई से एक आश्रम में आया था, वो एक कोई बहुत उग्र रूप में था और बच्चे घबराए थे, लेकिन उसने कथा कहना शुरू किया। फिर बच्चों को लगा ये बहुत अच्छी कथा है, और आगे बताइए। ही सेड अष्टादश सहस्राणि अष्टादश शतानि च हम वेत्ति शुको वेत्ति संजय वेत्ति वानवा। शुक की एक कास्ट है, संजय तो घोड़े वाला था, आप जानते, और ये जंगल का, यानी एक आदिवासी, आज के ज़माने में कहे तो एक ST SC और OBC, 3 लोगों को 8,000 पंक्तियाँ पता थी। दैट इज़ व्हाट द महाभारत से। महाभारत डजंट से ST SC OBC, मैं थोड़ा ओवर सिंप्लीफिकेशन कर रहा हूँ। महाभारत itself is a composite corpus of stories drawn from many languages, जो महाभारत ने खुद ने ही कहा है, और इसके साथ साथ बृहत कथा सरित सागर, द ओशन ऑफ स्टोरीज, पार्वती ने बहुत गुस्सा किया शंकर भगवान के ऊपर कि आप ये सभी दुनिया के काम करते, मेरे लिए कुछ भी नहीं करते। तो उन्होंने कहा कि आपके लिए मैं, तो एक ऐसी कुटिया बनाई, उसके अंदर वो कथा कहने लगे। तो उनके जो 2 असिस्टेंट थे, उनको लगा कि पार्वती को क्या कहते होंगे, इसलिए उन्होंने कान लगाया, यूज ड्रॉपिंग। पार्वती हर्ड, पार्वती सेंस 2 पीपल आर लिसनिंग टू दिस। ये मानव नहीं थे, दानव भी नहीं थे, दैत्य भी नहीं थे, उसके अधर बीच में ही थे। शी ओपन द डोर एंड फाउंड दिस 2 आर लिसनिंग, सो शी कर्स देम कि अब आपको मानव में जाना पड़ेगा, but you will not be able to remember a word of what Shiva has told me because it's a sacred story for me, और आप भूल जाएंगे। तो उन्होंने बहुत कि देवी जी आप इतना गुस्सा मत करना, कुछ तो आप राहत दे दीजिए अपीलेट कोर्ट में। सो शी सेड ऑल राइट, एंड इफ यू डू इनफ गुड वर्क यू विल स्टार्ट रिमेंबरिंग। तो ये दोनों नीचे जंगल में, एंड वन डे आफ्टर मेनी ईयर्स दे स्टार्ट रिमेंबरिंग। तो जैसे ही उनको याद आता है, द फोर्स ऑफ द मेमोरी सच, फिर से भूल ना जाए, वो किसी जानवर को पकड़ते हैं, उसका खून निकाल के किसी लकड़ी या किसी के साथ कहीं लिखना शुरू करते, एंड इन ऑर्डर टू रिमेंबर दैट, लिखने के बाद भी वो जोर से पढ़ते भी है। ये सब सुनने के लिए पशु पंछी सब इकट्ठा होते, बहुत तल्लीनता से वो सुनते रहते कथा, इतने तल्लीनता से कि इतने एकाग्रता से कि राजा, नज़दीक का राजा है, उसके खाने में उसको जो मीट मिलता है इज़ वेरी लीन, सफिशिएंट फैट नहीं। तो पूछता है कि हमारे राज्य में अभी पशु पंछी इतने दुबले पतले क्यों हो गए? तो कोई बोलता है कि वो कुछ कथा सुन रहे। तो राजा वहाँ जाता है, and then he rescues those stories. Actually these people are burning एक 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 करके लिखते हैं, बोलते हैं और जला भी रहे, ऐसा कुछ है. दी हाफ बर्न स्टोरी सेव्ड बिकेम दी कथा सरित सागर. अब जंगल में ये जो भाषा बोल रहे हैं वो जंगली भाषा, वो तो देव भाषा नहीं थी. इट वॉज ए प्राकृत. The foundation of all all narrative literature in India is Prakrit. The framework, the casing of all narrative literature in India is Sanskrit. तो एक तो केक है और उसका केसिंग है. आप केक वाले हैं, संस्कृत वाले केसिंग वाले. लेकिन संस्कृत का सौंदर्य अद्भुत है. इतना ही है कि प्राकृत का उस सौंदर्य उससे जरा भी कम नहीं है. इसलिए मेरा आप सबको विनंती है, कहना है, सभी भाषा के प्रति प्रेम रखें. अंग्रेजी के प्रति भी प्रेम रखें, हिंदी के प्रति भी प्रेम रखें. लेकिन कोई भाषा अगर ज़्यादा मगरूरी करती है तो उसको हटाना चाहिए. दक्षिण के मेरे दोस्त यही कहते हैं, हिंदी बहुत अच्छी है, सुंदर है, प्रेमचंद भी है उसमें हमारे राग दरबारी वाले भी है. लेकिन अगर वो साउथ पे राज्य करना चाहेगी तो उसको हम विरोध करेंगे. सभी भाषाओं के लिए लेट्स लव ऑल लैंग्वेजेस so that in the last day of human languages one can say in future that humans were an animal that loved languages. Now we are a different animal and maybe we can revive some of those languages. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Devy, for sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And now I would like to invite our Managing Director, Mr. Sugat Jain, to give the concluding remarks and vote of thanks. Mr. Jain.
First of all, I would like to thank all of you for making this lecture what it is. It won't be possible without all your support and being here. Definitely, Professor Devy, I've been trying to think of, how should I try to even probably summarize and thank you for your wonderful talk in a line or two. And I'm at a complete loss because personally I found it at so many different layers and probably a couple of layers which you purposely left unsaid. So I thank you very much, and it was a very interesting, enlightening, a very fresh perspective on so many things for all of us to learn about. And definitely it spoke of your scholarship and your wisdom of so many years of research. Thank you so much, and thank you for your very kind words for my father and what he's achieved. I would like to thank Mr. Verma, who literally set up Primus with Dr. Jain, and he initiated with my mother this whole lecture series. It was actually the idea of my father, but then probably he could not live to execute it. He could not be around us. Thank you, Mr. Verma. Thank you, Prasoon, for making all of this happen. He's helming Primus now. And thank you, Abhijit, Vijay, and the rest of the Primus team for making all of this possible. Thank you once again. Thank you, Professor Devy.